Hey everybody, this is Christy Furio with Keys to the Shop. Welcome to another edition of Shift Break. Glad to have you along today. Today's episode is brought to you by the Ground Control Cyclops brewer from Voga Coffee. You know, right now is a critical time for a couple of things in the coffee industry. One of them, of course, is takeaway coffee. And the quality of the experience a customer has in your shop heavily depends on what's in the cup, now more than ever. And the second thing that we really need is versatility and consistency. And these are two things that the Ground Control brewer really excels at. The Ground Control's SCA award-winning technology extracts things from the coffee that you never thought was possible. And personally speaking, having tasted the results of this machine, I can tell you it is truly a mind-blowing experience. And on top of that, not only is the Ground Control brewer changing the game and raising the bar for what batch brew coffee can be, but it can also produce hot chocolate, tea, cold brew, batch iced lattes, batch cold brew. This is a very versatile machine and very beautiful to look at, easy to use. And I just think the folks over at Voga Coffee are revolutionizing what we can expect from a batch brewer. If you really want to extract the most from your coffee and elevate the guest experience with your batch brew, have a versatile piece of equipment that is a showpiece as well, then the Ground Control Cyclops brewer is something you should definitely look into. Go to the website to find out more information over at vogacoffee.com. That's VOGA coffee.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by Flair Espresso, makers of all-manual lever press espresso machines. And let me tell you something about this. I think everybody should have one of these. I am very happy that I can finally make espresso at home, and it didn't have to take up a bunch of counter space, cost me thousands of dollars to do it. This simple piece of equipment, so well made, produces cafe-quality espresso right on your kitchen counter. It's so dependable, it's even used by professionals. There's coffee shops that are using these machines on their bar to make espresso. And again, this is something that is designed to be on your kitchen counter and create a balance between the ritual of making coffee and the convenience of something that's light, portable, and doesn't have really much of a learning curve at all to make amazing espresso at home. Right now, because you're listening to Keys to the Shop, Flair Espresso has generously offered a 5% discount on your entire order when you use the code Keys to the Flair at checkout. Again, that's 5% off your entire order when you use the code Keys to the Flair at checkout. That's a discount off an already accessibly priced piece of equipment that people would swear you paid a lot more for. So if you're looking to have great quality espresso at home or give your customers the ability to do that, then go check out their website to find out more information over at flairespresso.com. Okay, everybody. So today we get to talk about what I'm going to call the values action gap. This is this thing in business, and it's all businesses do this. Cafes do it a lot as well. And I have certainly written my fair share of manuals where the first thing you write is your mission. Besides the history of your coffee shop and all that, you talk about the vision, the mission, and the values, the core principles, the founding pillars, whatever words you're using to describe these values that you have. You're constructing an image in the mind of the person reading it that this is a company that really cares about, community. They care about their staff. They care about empathy, quality coffee. They're all about having the best coffee in town. Whatever your values are, these are things that are believed by most people at face value. Because why would anybody lie about this stuff? And in fact, most people don't lie about these because when most people are writing them, they're writing them as ideals. These are things that we really want to be true, but also somewhere in the back of our minds, we know that they actually aren't true yet. These are our values, but they're not actually things that are in practice right now. They're not things that you could point to in the shop and say, oh, well, that's where that value comes from, and that's where that value comes from. Now, of course, maybe older shops, you might be able to do that more often, but for the most part, these lists of values are relegated to the manual, and they're written once and for the most part forgotten about. And not because people are looking at them and going, well, I used to believe those things, but now I don't believe them. In fact, I believe the opposite, and I want to hate people, and I want to create a toxic culture, and I want to fill in the blank. No one's really maniacal enough. Okay, maybe some people are. I don't know. For the majority of coffee shop owners and operators are not that, Bond villain character trying to destroy people and a business and whatnot. But they, for busyness, for distraction, and just plain old assumption that these values are just going to kind of sprinkle down like fairy dust onto people, or people are just going to absorb these values by osmosis or mind reading, that's going to be the way that people see the business. Here's the problem, though. For a lot of baristas, and maybe even some customers, they see that the values that you espouse don't necessarily line up with the actions that you take. And for a lot of coffee shops, that doesn't mean that the actions are antithetical to the values. It just means that you can't really see any of those values in practice. For the most part, you just see people making coffee. And that's where it's difficult to really tell people, hey, you should write down your values without backing it up with, and you should write down an action plan for how you're going to follow up with actions on those values. Actually think long enough about when you write down community is a value, like providing a space for community. Okay, what does that look like in your community? Practically speaking, on Friday, how do you create community at 3 p.m. on Friday? You have to get that specific about some of this stuff, because if you don't, just like something that doesn't go on your calendar and you've got a busy week, it doesn't actually get done. So values don't mean anything really if they're not prioritized on your schedule and they're not planned for with significant chunks of time and thought and execution. So here's how you close this gap. Here's how you bridge the gap between values and actions. And it's important to do this too, by the way, because unnecessary turnover is largely due to people feeling that they've been sold a bill of goods when they read the job description, when they think about the fact that this coffee shop had this homepage that was so well designed that they thought they're going to go into this business that's obviously with all these values that they say they have. I'm going to have a good time working here. Well, when you find out how the sausage is made, you're in for a surprise, okay? Unless the company has actually taken the time to back up what they're saying on their values by investing into actions that requires financial investment, time investment, mental and creative investment, creativity, all that stuff. That's how you bridge the gap between these things. You make sure that everybody understands that these values are not just things that we believe, but they are things that we constantly connect to things that we do. And we view all of our actions and, in fact, make decisions purposefully through the lens of our values. By saying to your manager when they come to you with a question about what to do in a situation where there's a problem with an employee, are you just giving them an answer, or are you going back to the values and saying, okay, well, where does this fit in to our values, and how can we reinforce this and act in concert with these values in this situation? How do your values line up with things like sweeping and mopping, with setting up the openers during the closing shift well? How do your values inform the way people care for each other when the shift is being switched over, or how they relate to their managers or managers to baristas? Without prioritizing a connection to actions and tracking that really, and looking through the lens of values in action, then those values are actually going to backfire, because you're promising something that you're not delivering. Just like when people say, oh, there's a new specialty coffee shop in town, I want to go there because, maybe you spent a lot of money on some designer to, produce some ads for your shop. You have a really cool logo. Every sofa is modern and enviable. And they go in and they have rude service, or it's very slow, or the coffee is just really off or under roasted, or something is really bad, a lot of customers will feel like, hey, I paid a lot of money for this. I was told this was going to be the best coffee in town. Everything said this was going to be a special experience, but now it's not. That's a failure operationally when it comes to the little bits and pieces, the details that make up the whole of the experience in the shop. That's a failure, a breakdown of operations that needs to be addressed. Before we started writing checks with our marketing that our actions couldn't cash. Now flip that over to the baristas basically being the customers of the business and coming into a situation where they're promised all of these things. They're promised support, they're promised communication and resources and continued education and training. And geez, look at this cool espresso machine and all this stuff. And then they get in there and it's just kind of, nobody really communicates very well. Resources are very far and few between. You don't have much training at all. And you read the values back to yourself after your first 2 weeks thinking, is this, maybe I got the wrong cafe? Did I potentially get hired by the wrong cafe? This is not new. I've experienced this as a barista, and there is no doubt in my mind that there is untold number of baristas out there who are currently just stewing on this reality. And in some cases, they just leave, or they, right now, more than ever, are calling out owners publicly for toxic environments where these companies have a good reputation because they're good with words, but their actions didn't back it up. So, yes, you should be writing values and core values, and you should really be thinking about what it is that drives your business. But you need to be thinking about these things in context of actions and how specifically you plan to go about that. I made this analogy before, but it's, again, like a business plan. Prove to yourself and then prove to others how you're going to back up that community service, all that stuff. If you don't have a plan beyond wordsmithing, then it's better to not put it on paper at all until you can back it up, until you can follow through with it. Then when people say, oh, here are their values, they almost won't need to read it. They can see that this is valuable to you, and because of the things that you do, how you prioritize your money, your time, and your attention. Those are the things that really are valuable to people. So that's how you bridge this gap. And as we go on in 2020 and we seek more connection with our staff and our customers, and we kind of rethink what it's like to be a coffee bar in this time, where we're trying to be more socially aware and trying to pivot in the midst of hard times, we need authenticity more than ever. We need integrity in business more than ever. It starts with bridging this gap and making good on our promises. So I hope that this episode was helpful for you and that it inspired some actions related to your values in your shop. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you here next week on another episode of Shift Break, from Keys to the Shop.